The U.S.'s religious population called it grotesque, disgusting, and blasphemous.
She's not a Christian!
Now, we all heard of The Exorcist before, but did you know that it was based on an actual true story? But first, welcome back to Plastic Lounge Podcast. Today, we have 3 true paranormal possession stories, some even with real recorded footage.
Jesus Christ.
And to kick it all off, we have Messiah. What you got for us hot off the press?
All right. Well, I don't know. This is quite hot off the press, as this happened in 1842. but it's still hot. Before we get into this, let me just say that when I was researching this, I was getting chills reading through some of these details. In 1800, early 1800s, there was a woman, 28-year-old woman, by the name of Gottlieben. Now, here in America, you guys might think that that name sounds a little bit funny. She was from a rural German village of Mottlingen.
Motley Crue?
Nope, not Motley Crue. Mottlingen, which was a small German village located within the Black Forest. Now, Didas grew up. I'm going to be referring to her a lot as Didas throughout here. At a young age, both of her parents died unexpectedly. So she lived most of her life through her siblings and her church. Grew up in a kind of a strict Lutheran family. Although her parents passed away, she still attended services and had her other siblings to kind of back her and kind of stay on a good path. In 1842, in the small German village, the people living near Didas's home began to hear strange noises. Many of those were during the dark hours of the night. Not all of them, but many of them happened at night. A doctor and some other locals ended up going over there to kind of check on her, make sure everything was okay. And what they witnessed that night of staying with her, they could not explain, such as objects moving on their own, furniture completely moving from one side of the room to the other. Mind you, these are people not going in here expecting to see some possession type things. They're going in on a welfare check of a 28-year-old woman. On top of the furniture moving, they were hearing bangs and thuds all across the house throughout the entire night. Scrapes as well. Scratching sounds on the doors, on the walls. Everybody is wondering what is going on. So after they stayed the night with Didas, the doctor and the locals came to the conclusion that the house was haunted. Clearly, the house is haunted. So, the eerie phenomenon did not stop there. Other strange things began to happen. Didas began to claim that she was being visited at night by a ghostly apparition of a woman holding a baby in her arms.
That's terrifying.
She was prone to having sudden blackouts where people would be talking to her and she would literally just black out. And on one occasion, she went into an unresponsive trance-like state for the entire day before snapping out of it. And when she came through, she pretty much had no memory and was like, what the heck are you guys talking about?
Didas got the beatus, dude.
Maybe she had diabetes.
Or she's possessed.
Well, that too. She could also be possessed.
Now, there were whispers around the town, obviously with all these crazy things and people seeing and hearing these crazy things, that the house was haunted, she was cursed, or maybe she was both. She's haunted and she's cursed. And since the paranormal activity seemed to be primarily around her because nobody else was having anything happen, they ended up sending Gottlieben to live with her cousin. So they sent her out of the town. They were like, you gotta get the heck out of here. I don't know what you're doing here. Mind you, this is like 1842. I mean, they're probably like, what the heck's going on for real? I mean, I would be here. It's 2023.
Yeah, that's like next level shit for back then, dude.
Yeah, we were talking about earlier, 1970, people throwing up in the theaters. Can you imagine what they were doing in 1840? When shit was happening in front of their face.
They were burning people, dog.
I'm surprised they didn't just burn her. I'm going to be honest with you. So going back to the story, like I mentioned, Gottlieben got sent to live with her cousin, and the haunting apparently followed her to her new home, leaving the other siblings that she was living with in peace.
So maybe she was just fucked up.
That was nice of her.
She really just took that upon herself.
So Gottlieben's story ended up getting the attention of Reverend Blumhart, which I failed to mention at the beginning was the pastor at her church growing up, a guy named Johann Blumhart.
Damn these names.
It's crazy, dude.
Sorry if I butcher anything. I'm assuming the reverend, the pastor here, kind of knew a little bit about it, but he took it upon himself to go visit and came to the conclusion that she was in fact possessed by a demon after witnessing several different evidence himself, such as convulsive fits, speaking in different voices, intense bouts of uncharacteristic cursing and profanity. So she would just begin just yelling, be like, fuck you, fuck this. And that was very unlike her. She was a very sweet young lady.
Was she also doing gang signs?
Her siblings also claim that she would sometimes, again, go into trance-like states and also sometimes get violent and attack them, which again, when she came through, she had no idea and was scared and, so on and so forth. So Blumhart took it upon himself to essentially take care of her and try to get whatever is attached to her out. He offered her spiritual support through her entire process, and during her regular visits, she would confide in him more and more information that would happen when he wasn't there. Gottlieben claimed that when she was just an infant, evil spirits had tried to kidnap her and had been driven away by the power of her mother's prayers. Now, this is what she told the Reverend after all these things have been happening to her. She also insisted that her aunt was a real witch. Things progressed to the point where the entity allegedly would possess Gottlieben to speak with Blumhart directly. During these conversations, the woman, Gottlieben, would speak in a voice that was not her own, and the spirit claimed to be the one who would visit her at night. That the mom with the baby in her arm, if you guys recall. She told the pastor that she was a widow who had murdered 2 people during the span of her lifetime, and that these cruel acts had drawn the devil into her. However, this was not the only spirit who was apparently tormenting Gottlieben, and more began to make themselves known throughout the months of this process, until eventually there were apparently hundreds of demons residing in this one young woman. Interestingly enough, many of these other spirits made the same type of claims as that original woman, that they were in fact victims of demonic possession for different things that they've done throughout their life. Obviously alarmed, Blumhart immediately began the ritual of an exorcism, which caused, as you can imagine, a huge escalation in the strange phenomenon that was happening around Gottlieben. She became even more violent and needed to be strained at many times during this. They said at one point she would actually vomit like glass and sand and nails.
Oh my God.
Like iron nails or like fingernails?
No, this said like iron nails. They're claiming that when she was vomiting, sometimes she would vomit up sand, glass, and nails, and sometimes just straight blood.
Well, I would assume it's blood if she's swallowing nails and glass.
At one point, Gottlieben told the pastor that some of those possessed spirits within her had left her body to run thousands of miles away, where they allegedly caused an earthquake. Bizarrely enough, that news would not come too long after that, and she would have no way of knowing that an earthquake happened on the other side of the world. She claimed that these demons left her and went to go cause this earthquake. The earthquake was in the West Indies, which at the 1842 especially, how do you know that?
Right.
So the end would be a long time coming. The exhausting exorcism dragged on for nearly 2 years. According to the account of many people, these spirits actually ejected themselves willingly out of Gottlieben in order to attack her sister, Catherine. Blumhart was able to face both possessed women's demons, and eventually, after a 2-year battle, got rid of all demons, and at one point was being famous for saying, "Jesus is victor." Now, Blumhart did use this opportunity to become quite the celebrity and almost a hero at times, making several books about what happened. Apparently, at one point in time in the 1850s, Gottlieben actually joined Blumhart for part of the cause and would team up with him to kind of travel and tell the story, and eventually passed away in 1880. And the mystery remains. Did these accounts in 1842 really happen? Or was this another priest trying to get rich quick? So hopefully that story gave you some goosebumps like it did me. Like I said, there's some crazy stuff in there. Speaking of crazy stuff, Rebel, what do you have for us?
I have
Syphilis.
Gonorrhea.
I have AIDS.
Dude, that's like how your announcement came out? Like, I'm actually going to pass away within the year?
Yeah, that's how you tell us.
When I was searching for this, I found a story that I never heard of. However, turns out it's the first ever recorded exorcism. They put it on film and they show everything.
Whoa.
But first, you got this far, make sure you hit the like button if you do believe in ghosts. If you don't, then hit the dislike button, I guess. I don't know. But let's get into this. My story is about the exorcism of Maurice Therlo. Now, Maurice was born in 1938 as a nice little farm child. His parents had a farm. They were hardworking people. And growing up, Maurice kind of filled those shoes, filled the gap, and just went to work. His home life was pretty much not that good, let's be honest. His dad was actually very abusive and almost like a sociopath. So with all this abuse happening, Maurice was sick of it. He could not handle this anymore. And so he called out to God. Maurice called out to God, but nothing happened. The abuse kept happening. This is what broke Maurice. He abandoned his faith and called out to the devil to help him instead. We're going to come back to this. This is going to come up later in the story. So a few years later, pretty much went through all the abuse, all that stuff, had a terrible life, but he got past it. He left his home. Within his first marriage, things started getting a little weird. His wife would notice blood starting to pour from the crucifixes that they had hanging on the walls inside their home.
Whoa.
And obviously, the wife is freaking out. She has no idea what the hell is happening. She's scared, but Maurice tells her not to worry about it and to ignore it, almost like this has happened before. Now, this is just the first incident where things start getting a little weird. Turns out they get divorced. She could not handle him anymore. Years go on. Remember when I was talking about how he reached out to the devil? In 1981, his father lost it and ended up murdering his mother, as well as doing a self-deletion on himself. And Maurice, when hearing this news, was relieved. He felt like his prayers had been answered, but not by God. With his father being gone, things escalated. So 3 years later, after his father did the acts, he ended up getting married again. He had another wife. Her name was Nancy. She was a nice, loving woman. Now, as I was saying before, the paranormal events started acting up, and so did Maurice's attitude. He would go about his day, and out of nowhere, he would just start crying blood out of his eyes. Obviously, this was a huge issue. Nancy was not okay with this. She thought he had some medical issue. And then one night when they're going to bed, she would notice little crosses etched all into his skin, all across his body. She didn't know if it was him doing it to himself or if there was some weird medical disease that he had where it put crosses on him. So these things could be chalked up to Maurice being weird. However, so one day, Nancy was in the living room, relaxing with Maurice, doing what couples do pretty much. She sees him get up and walk right into the kitchen. And as soon as he turns the corner, she hears a bang outside. She looks over to the window and there's Maurice walking out of the barn. She's obviously panicking because she literally just saw him in the same room as her. And so as soon as the outside Maurice walks into the door, she's like, how did you get out there? And he's like, I've been out in the barn all day long. What are you talking about? And so at this point, Nancy's frantic. She's like, I just saw two of you at the same time. I don't know if you teleported or what. And when Nancy brought this up to Maurice, he told her that this wasn't the first time that this has happened. He said that he would lose track of time and just be somewhere else. But Nancy was not the only person that noticed him in multiple places at once. They actually had multiple children with him, and one of their children, her name was Jenny. She was getting ready to go into town with her father. And as she's getting ready to go to the car, her father walks out the door. She forgets something and has to go back inside. As she's running back inside, she looks over into her parents' room and just yells out a blood-curdling scream. She sees her father on the bed putting his shoes on. She literally just saw him walk out, fully clothed, boots and everything on. They don't know how to handle this type of situation. Only thing they know how to do was to send him to the hospital. which I don't know what kind of mental gymnastics you're trying to do with that. I don't see how paranormal stuff and teleporting and being in different locations, how that can be solved with medicine.
Dude, people don't know, though. They call the cops for that shit.
I feel like the cops would be better than going to a doctor being like, hey, he's disappearing.
What do you got for this, doc?
What do you want me to do? So while he's in the hospital, the paranormal events did not stop. The hospital staff would notice things flying across the room. He would still have his tears of blood coming out of his eyes. And while he was there, he would become more violent. He was already a violent person, but he was becoming more and more violent. At one point, he was so violent, they had to hold him down, and he started talking in Latin. He started speaking Latin, and not just speaking in fluent Latin, started speaking it backwards. So obviously the hospital could not help him. They're like, we don't know what to do. Have him back. They just sent him home. They're like, we can't fix any of this. The man's got the demon. He's got the demons in him. Seek somewhere else. And now this is the point that two people find out about this case. You guys know who these two people are? I'll let you guys take a guess.
Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Ed and Lorraine Warren. So this is one of their documented cases. Now, obviously, there's a whole lot of drama saying if their cases were actually real or not. However, like I was saying before, they have video proof. This is the first documented, filmed exorcism that ever happened. Now they're getting the exorcism going, and as prayers are being spoken, you can see Maurice physically in pain. He's stuck to a chair, agitated, upset, and all of a sudden you can start seeing on the left side of his face, blisters are starting to form. His skin's starting to bubble up as these prayers are being said. And as the video goes on, you'll see a gash come across his face. The wound will start growing, getting bigger and bigger, almost like his skin is being torn from him as this exorcism goes on. As everything was reaching up to a climax, Maurice dropped to the ground. You could feel the heaviness in the air dissipate, and the wounds on his face were starting to heal, almost like this never happened. Now, Maurice was pretty much free from the possession at this point, and years passed. Nothing really happened, except for one night. In 1992, Maurice was consumed by the darkness again. He waited for Nancy to come home. He had a loaded shotgun waiting for her. And when she came home, Maurice confronted her. They got in an argument, and it led to Nancy running out of the home. She was darting across the yard trying to get to a neighbor's house. And at that point, Maurice walks up to the window, holds the shotgun, and pulls the trigger. Nancy got hit in the left side of her shoulder and just dropped. Maurice runs out there, grabs her, brings her back in, sets her on the floor, looks her dead in the eyes, and says, "You'll never forget this." And at that point, he backs up, and you can see him struggling, almost like he's fighting something inside himself. And he puts the gun up to his mouth and does a little self-deletion, if you will.
Presses delete.
Just like his father did way back then.
Don't fuck around with the devil. You fuck around, you find out.
He found out. He found out real quick. 30 years later. Listen, I fucked around and I did find out. But I do want to find out on the Exorcist story. I have no idea where this is going, to be honest. And you probably don't either.
The movie The Exorcist was based on a true story. But in my story today, I will be leaving out names, as the family this happened to has lived a life of worry because of these tragic and horrific events. So on Plastic Lounge, we will be respecting that. However, I will say that it is not hard to find if you are looking on your own accord. Let's get into it. In 1935, a little baby boy was born. His name was Roland Doe.
Roland Doe?
Roland Doe.
Or like Roland Dope.
Smoking dope.
Smoking crack. That rock, baby.
Drinking beers.
Smoking beer.
Roland was born in Cottage Town, Maryland, which at the time in 1935 already had kind of like a witchy vibe going around. Lots of stories of exorcisms and possessions. But let's not jump the gun here. Now, Roland lived with his mom, we'll call her Anne, and Anne had a sister, Tilly, Aunt Tilly, who would come over, stay the night, visit, bring Roland presents and treats and whatnot. And Roland was absolutely in love with Aunt Tilly. She was his favorite family member, and every time she came over, he couldn't wait to see her. You could say Aunt Tilly was a bit of a spiritualist. She believed in fringe beliefs such as magic and spiritual healing, and did not really vibe with this. She wanted Tilly to keep it out of the house and not to expose Roland too much to it. However, one day, Tilly brought over a box, and it kind of caught the eye of Roland because it had like a game look to it. So Roland says, Aunt Tilly, what's in the box? What is that, a game? Can we play it? And Aunt Tilly says, no, Roland. This isn't a game. This is my Ouija board. So Roland says, what's a Ouija board, Aunt Tilly? But before she can answer, his mom Anne interjects, bringing Tilly aside. She does not want Roland to know about Ouija boards at all. So later that week, while Aunt Tilly is staying over, Anne is woken up out of bed with a glass of water. She walks to the kitchen and she can hear whispering. She's thinking, could this be Tilly? But who is she speaking to? She walks down the hall towards Tilly's room. The door to her room is slightly ajar with a little bit of light peeking out. So Anne silently scoots over to Tilly's door. She peers in the crack in the door, takes her hand and kind of opens it a little bit. And there, sitting on the ground, is her sister, Aunt Tilly, and Roland, cross-legged in a circle with the Ouija board on the floor. She doesn't say anything just yet. She can clearly hear her sister Tilly teaching Roland how to use it. They're asking if anyone can hear them. They're trying to communicate with the dead. Anne at this point flips out. She opens the door, swings it wide open. She says, Roland, get your ass to bed. Tilly, come here. Tilly comes over to Anne and they have a heated argument. Roland runs up to his room and goes to bed. Now, in the years after, Tilly and Anne, they continued to be close. So did Roland and Tilly. She came over a little less frequently. However, Roland, somehow, some way, ended up with the Ouija board. Anne knew this, but there wasn't much she could do to keep a little boy from playing games. So she really didn't like it, but Roland would frequently take out the Ouija board and play with it. One day, Anne gets a telephone call. She answers. Unfortunately, her sister Tilly has passed away. She was the first to be notified. Tilly is absolutely crushed by this news. Tilly was her only sister, but Roland took it especially hard. To him, Aunt Tilly was everything. Now, 3 days, only 3 days after Tilly's death, come the first strange disturbances. Roland is in bed. He's been kind of quiet since Tilly's death. He's been kind of moping around the house, not enjoying activities as much. He's now laying in bed, trying to go to sleep. He shuts his eyes. He's finally finding himself drifting off. Then he hears knock, knock, knock. Can't quite make out where it's coming from. It's not loud enough to be someone at the door. It's not loud enough to wake everyone else up in the house, but it's loud enough to where it prevented him from going to sleep. So he's looking around the room. He gets up, he leans over to look underneath his bed. Nothing under there. Kind of just sits up in bed and looks around a little bit. And he lays back down, thinking, oh, maybe he was hearing something at the neighbor's house. Maybe it was somebody outside. He lays back down, tries to go to bed again. And there it is again. Knock, knock, knock. This time, Roland could kind of get an idea where it's coming from. The knocks are kind of getting a little softer. There it is again. Knock, knock, knock. Roland is out of bed at this point, getting in closer and closer to his bedroom wall, right where the headboard of his bed sits. And he leans his ear up to the wall to try to get a closer listen. And right as he presses his ear to the wall, boom, 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 right on the other side of the inside wall next to Roland's ear, Roland backpedals to the point where he can't catch his balance and falls flat on his butt as he stares at this wall that just boomed right next to his ear. He's staring in disbelief, and he sits there for about an hour just staring, nothing else happening, no other knocks, no other booms. After a while, Roland kind of lays down right where he is on the floor and goes to bed because he's so tired, but also because he's so petrified. Nothing happened for a few more days. No more knocks, no more booms. However, Anne, Roland's mom, notices a little sound every now and then. She'll be in the kitchen making dinner. She'll hear this, what she thinks is drips. It Sounds like a leaky faucet or something. So she kind of like stops what she's doing when you hear something you can't quite make out in the distance to try to hear it better, but she can't. She always seems to hear it when she's doing something, so she can't quite hear it clearly, but every now and then she'll hear it. Drip, drip, leaky faucet, water dripping on something. It's getting to the point where she's hearing these drips everywhere, all over the house, the bathroom, the kitchen, her bedroom, while in bed. When she's doing laundry outside, she's hearing drip, drip, drip. It got to the point where she had to call a plumber over. She says, listen, I don't know if I have a leaky pipe somewhere or if it's a faucet, but I cannot track down this drip. I hear it all over the house and I don't know how that's possible. How I can hear a leaky faucet everywhere in every room of the house. So the plumber comes over. He says, listen, miss, I've checked every pipe, every fitting, every faucet and every valve in this house. You have 0 leaks and I don't hear anything. In fact, this plumbing is remarkable for its age. I would say you have another 10, 20 years on this plumbing. And then he leaves. Anne and Roland continued to hear this drip for many days after, but it wasn't long before the drips turned to scratches. And now there's scratches coming from the insides of the walls. But only Anne hears them at this point. And ever since the boom incident in Roland's room, he's been a little quiet about things. He hasn't been vocal about what he notices in the house. He used to say he could hear the drips, but after a while, he stopped saying anything about them. And ever since Anne has been saying she's been hearing this scratching noise coming from the walls, Roland has not remarked about them at all. He has not said he notices them. One day, Anne is in the kitchen. She's doing some dishes and she hears the scratching. It's very faint at first. It sounds like if you were to put fingernails on a wall and drag them down. Maybe a critter is inside the wall, she thinks. A mouse, a rat, something. Sounds like claws on a wall. She can kind of tell that the scratches are coming from upstairs. Mind you, it's nighttime right now and she's just finishing up some dinner dishes, so it's dark outside. She turns the water off and she slowly makes her way upstairs towards Roland's room. Scratches again. She slowly makes her way to Roland's room. The door is shut. Scratching gets louder. Every step she takes towards Roland's room, the scratching intensifies. Almost to the point where she cannot believe Roland isn't bursting out of his room, terrified. The scratching is so intense now that Anne feels the need to rush into Roland's room for fear of her son's safety. As soon as she opens the door, she sees Roland in bed, sitting straight up, staring at her. The scratching immediately stops, and in that exact moment, all happening at once, Roland's bed moves about 5 feet across the room, all while he's sitting straight up staring at her, not breaking eye contact.
Nope. I'd be out. I'd leave my son at that point.
Be like, you're on your own, dog.
Fuck that kid. I don't even love him that much.
Anne is beside herself. She says, no, thank you. Immediately calls her priest.
As one should.
Her priest comes over. He takes a look at Roland. By this time, Roland's condition has worsened. He's been having tremors, night sweats. He's been cursing, profanity. He's been saying the Lord's name in vain. Scratches are appearing on Roland's arm left and right. He has red grip marks on his arm like someone is forcefully grabbing him. The priest comes in and starts to recite some prayers. He's spraying holy water on Roland. The holy water smokes as it hits Roland's skin. Roland screams out in pain, sits straight up, looks the priest dead in the eyes, and breaks his nose with his hand. The priest grabs his nose, blood gushing all down his face, and runs out of the house. After that incident, the priest did not want to come back to Roland's house. Anne calls another priest over. He comes over, tries the same thing, same results, except Roland didn't break his nose. Just more shouting, cursing, more burning holy water, more scratches. During this time, Roland is visibly upset about something on his chest, to the point where the priest takes Roland's pajamas, opens a couple buttons to reveal his chest, only to see that in deep wounds, scratches on Roland's chest, the name Lewis appears. The priest and Anne are horrified. They've never seen anything like this in their lives. After a few days of thinking, Anne kind of puts 2 and 2 together. St. Louis is where Tilly was from. She would make the trip out there often. Anne had a lot of family in St. Louis. So, taking that as a sign, Anne packed Roland up and moved to St. Louis to stay with her extended family. While doing this, She also immediately put Roland into a hospital. While in the hospital, medical professionals, doctors, nurses, they would tend to Roland 24/7. Although they couldn't find anything wrong, they agreed that he had some sort of condition which caused his skin to sweat. He became pale. Wounds would appear on Roland. They just couldn't do anything about it. To them, he looked healthy. All the tests they ran came back great. Roland seemed to be a healthy, young 14-year-old boy to them, although he clearly had something wrong with him. So the hospital agreed to have more priests come in and perform an actual exorcism this time. Before, these priests would just recite prayers and try to heal. This time, they had to get a certified, approved exorcism from the Catholic Church. This event was so traumatic to Anne, her being Lutheran, she converted to Catholicism just to further strengthen the possibility that this exorcism would be successful. The priests performed the exorcism on Roland while in the hospital. During this time, Roland is visibly upset, throwing tantrums, having seizures, tearing at his clothes, his skin bright red, his eyes wide open. He's vomiting all over his bed. He's urinating himself. They have to swap his clothes constantly. Roland, at one point, rips open the buttons on his pajamas to reveal his stomach. The priest would describe as a burned image of a horned beast detailed on Roland's stomach. The priest said, "Enough is enough. We have to do this now." They complete the exorcism, say their prayers, and Roland immediately falls asleep. Roland is asleep for 4 whole days. It just so happens, the day Roland woke up out of his deep sleep was the day after Easter Sunday. Roland was completely fine. His skin had cleared up. He was no longer sweating. He was no longer pale. He looked excellent. The priests and Anne are sitting bedside. They open their eyes because they had been sleeping too, only to see Roland awake, looking around, dazed. Then Roland locks eyes with the priest and his mom Anne, and he utters these words: "He's gone." That was the final day of Roland's tragic possession. Roland had no other symptoms or paranormal activity happen to him for the rest of his life. He went on to live a successful life, although it was in constant worry that people would find out about his childhood past and his supernatural happenings. Now, after this, newspapers went crazy about Roland's story, again using pseudonyms for his name and keeping details quite vague. However, it caught the eye of the writer of The Exorcist, who went on to use Roland's story as the base for his novel, which released in 1971, and then would go on to release The Exorcist, the movie, in 1973, which brings us back to the beginning. If you made it this far, you are a real one. Thank you so much for watching. That was 3 true paranormal possession stories right here on Plastic Lounge. Please join the Discord down below. You want to chat offline or share some stories and experiences of your own, hit that sub, comment down below.
Leave a comment if you believe in Jesus. Amen. Can I get an amen in the comments?
And stay tuned for the next one. We love you.